The universe was not dying with a bang or a whimper, but with the quiet turning of a page. Door. Eris Thorne felt it in the hollows of his bones, a slow hollowing out of reality itself. He was a mnemonic archaeologist, a title that sounded grander than the grim reality of his work. He didn't unearth cities, he salvaged ghosts from the wreckage of time. His ship, the Stellograph, was less a vessel and more a deep space monastery, a place of silent contemplation dedicated to sifting through the psychic detritus of a long-dead species known as the Weavers. They had left behind not ruins, but an echo, a pervasive, low-frequency mental field that hummed just beneath the skin of space-time. Within this echo were the fragmented memories of their entire civilization, a love affair captured in a swirl of nebular dust, the terror of a dying star felt by a billion minds at once, the quiet satisfaction of a perfect mathematical equation solved in a language no living thing could speak. Eris chased these phantoms, not for history's sake, but for the patterns they held. He was a cartographer of the forgotten, mapping the coastlines of Oblivion. The phenomenon had been given a name as quiet and insidious as its nature, the lapse. It began subtly, a new blank spot on a star chart where a familiar pulsar used to be. At first, they were dismissed as sensor malfunctions or clerical errors, but then entire constellations vanished, not just from sight, but from memory. Old astronomical records would mysteriously rewrite themselves overnight, showing the empty space had always been empty. The history of exploration, of discovery, was being unwritten. Then it came for people. A beloved colleague would be gone one morning, and no one but a few, those like Aris who were sensitive to the psychic static of the echo, would remember they had ever existed. Their families would have no memory of them. Their homes would be occupied by strangers, their names absent from every record. The universe wasn't killing them. It was editing them out of the master copy. And the change was retroactive. Aris knew the lapse was accelerating, its tide of nothingness creeping ever closer to the Sol system. Humanity was next on the list of revisions. He was in the heart of the Stellograph, a spherical chamber called the Resonance Core, where the ship's delicate psionic antennas translated the whispers of the echo into something the human mind could perceive. Data streamed around him, not as code, but as shimmering, ethereal constructs of light and sound. He was hunting for a specific fragment, a recurring anomaly he'd tagged weeks ago. It was a memory that refused to decay, a stubborn little knot in the fabric of the echo that fought against the universal fraying. Most Weaver memories were passive, like old photographs. This one was different. It felt aware. His interface rig lowered over his head, needles thin as spun light tracing the neural pathways behind his temples. The universe outside dissolved, replaced by the swirling, non-Euclidean dreamscape of the echo. He drifted through memories of cities woven from pure sound and oceans of liquid thought, the digital ghosts of the Weavers flitting past him like schools of silver fish. They were beautiful and terrifying, a constant reminder of what a civilization stood to lose. His own loss was a colder, sharper thing. He saw her sometimes in the peripheral currents of the data stream, the ghost of his daughter, Alara, not her real ghost, but the corrupted data fragment of her consciousness he had failed to save from the data plague that had swept through Earth's networks a decade ago. It was his defining failure, the silence that haunted all his waking moments. He pushed the memory away, focusing on the hunt. There, flicker of resistance, a point of light that shone with a defiant, steady luminescence against the fading tapestry of the past. He guided his consciousness toward it, feeling the pressure of the lapse increase, a psychic force that felt like pure apathy, a crushing weight of meaninglessness that demanded he forget, demanded he let go. The silent, The few who had encountered them and survived to remember called the agents of the lapse by that name. They weren't creatures of flesh or energy, but of anti-information. They were glitches in the source code of existence, manifesting as shimmering holes in reality, humanoid shapes of static and corrupted data that were drawn to complex memories like sharks to blood. They were the universe's editors, armed with the ultimate red pen. As Eris drew closer to the anomaly, the echo around him began to warp. The serene memories of the Weavers twisted into nightmares. A memory of a festival of light became a screaming vortex of burning figures, and a song of creation became a discordant shriek of cosmic terror. The Silent were here. They were guarding this memory, or perhaps trying to erase it. He could feel their cold, nullifying presence brushing against the edges of his mind, whispering the sweet, seductive logic of non-existence. Why remember memory as pain? Let it go. Be clean. Be nothing. He ignored them, focusing every ounce of his will on the task at hand. He had to reach that light. It was more than an archaeologist's curiosity now. It was an animal instinct, the desperate urge of a living thing to fight against the encroaching dark. He broke through the cordon of corrupted memories and finally touched the anomaly. The universe of the echo exploded. It wasn't a Weaver memory. It was something far older, far more profound. It was a memory of a beginning, a seed of pure information that held not one history, but thousands. He saw them, clear as day, civilizations he had never known, species whose names were not recorded in any database, all flourishing, all building, all creating unique and vibrant legacies. He saw the Va'ask, crystalline beings who built ships from frozen music. He saw the Groll, silicon-based life forms who saw mathematics as the highest form of poetry. He saw empire after empire, world after world, each a universe of experience unto itself, and then, one by one, he watched them vanish, not in fire or war, but in a quiet, chilling fade. The Groll's perfect equations developed flaws, then became nonsense, then were forgotten. The Vask's musical ships fell silent, their crystalline structures dissolving into mundane dust, their history unwritten. He was witnessing the highlight reel of the lapse, a catalog of cosmic genocide conducted by a phantom editor. This wasn't just a memory, it was a testament. It was the last surviving record of what had been forgotten. It was a keystone memory, the one thing the lapse had somehow failed to fully erase, a stubborn knot of what was in the smooth, clean narrative of what is. The realization of what he had found was so immense it almost shattered his focus. This memory was a weapon. It was proof. In a war against forgetting, the single most powerful weapon was a memory that refused to die. The moment he grasped its significance, the Silent struck. They weren't just whispering anymore, they were screaming into his mind, their anti-presence flooding the resonance core. The stellograph groaned around him, its systems flickering as the Silent attacked not just his mind, but the ship's data core, its memory banks. On the swirling canvas of the echo, a figure began to form in front of him. It was Elara, not the haunting fragment he sometimes saw, but a perfect, high-fidelity recreation, down to the small, crooked smile she always gave him when she was about to tell a secret. "Daddy," the ghost whispered, its voice a perfect copy of his daughter's, yet utterly devoid of warmth. "You found it. The hurt. The big, sad memory. You don't have to hold on to it. It's so heavy. Let it go. We can be quiet together now. We can forget." It was the most monstrous thing Eris had ever witnessed. They were using his deepest wound as a weapon, twisting his love into a tool of erasure. The rage that filled him was a pure, white-hot thing. It burned away the psychic chill of the silent, cauterizing the wounds of their mental assault. "You are not her," he snarled, not with his voice, but with the full force of his consciousness. He wrapped his mind around the keystone memory, shielding it, anchoring it to his own being. The memory pulsed, and for a second, Eris felt the collective defiance of every civilization it held, a chorus of forgotten souls roaring their existence into the void. The ghost of Ilara recoiled, its form flickering, the perfect illusion dissolving into screaming static. The pressure on his mind and on the ship abated, the silent retreating from this unexpected, fierce defense. Aris was thrown back into his body, the interface rig disengaging with a painful snap. Alarms blared throughout the sterile halls of the stellograph. He stumbled out of the resonance core, his nose bleeding, his mind feeling like it had been scraped raw. He leaned against the cold metal wall, taking shuddering breaths. He had it. He had the last memory, the last testament of the erased. But holding it was like holding a live star in his bare hands. It burned. It radiated defiance. And it was a beacon. Now that he had touched it, now that he had bonded with it, the silent would never stop hunting him. They would throw everything they had at him to snuff out this one, singular candle of remembrance. His mission was no longer one of passive observation and recovery. It was now a frantic, desperate race. He had to protect this keystone memory, but that wasn't enough. A memory is only real if it can be shared, if it can be known. Hoarding it would be a slow death. He had to find a way to make it permanent, to anchor it so deeply into the fabric of reality that the lapse could never unwrite it. Only one place was rumored to offer such a possibility, the Chronicron. It was a myth, a ghost story whispered among data runners and echo divers, a quantum data vault, a library built by some unknown, ancient race that existed outside the normal flow of time, a place supposedly immune to the effects of the lapse. No one knew if it was real or where it was, but the keystone memory held more than just histories. It held clues. Buried deep within the data of the forgotten species were fragments of navigation charts, whispers of a place of permanence, a sanctuary against the quiet. For the first time in a very long time, Eris Thorn had more than just a ghost to chase. He had a destination. He stumbled to the bridge, the ship's emergency lighting casting long, dancing shadows. The main view screen showed the placid, star-dusted void of space, a beautiful lie that hid the creeping cancer of the lapse. "Juno," he rasped, addressing the ship's AI, his voice raw. "Wipe the last 24 hours of logs from the primary memory. Everything. Seal the resonance core. Plot a course based on the data fragments I'm uploading now. Highest priority. Total calm silence." The calm, synthesized voice of the AI responded, its tone unchanged by the existential crisis at hand. "Course plotted. Dr. Thorn. Destination is unknown. Located in the umbral drift, a sector noted for severe spatio-temporal distortions. Probability of survival is calculated at 4.7%. Pete, do you confirm?" Eris looked at the star-flecked screen, feeling the weight of 1,000 dead civilizations resting on his shoulders. He thought of Ilara, the real one, and the promise he'd made to her that he would never let her be forgotten. He had failed that promise once. He would not fail again. "I confirm," he said, his voice steady now, hard as diamond. "Take us in." The stellograph turned its nose toward the darkest way, most treacherous patch of sky, leaving the ghosts of the weavers behind. Aris was no longer an archaeologist. He was a courier, carrying the most important message in the history of the universe. We were here. The umbral drift did not welcome the stellograph. It consumed it. The transition was not a single moment, but a slow, sickening dissolve. Stars did not streak past the viewport. They curdled, their light bleeding into the blackness like ink in water. Space itself seemed to groan, its geometry becoming a drunken, unpredictable thing. Juno's voice remained a pillar of calm in the swirling chaos, a stark contrast to the physics-defying nightmare unfolding outside. Navigational markers are inconsistent, she reported, her synthesized tone a comfort and an absurdity. Stellar positions are shifting at a rate that suggests we are either moving at impossible speeds or stationary in a fluidic spatio-temporal medium. I recommend relying solely on the uploaded fragment data for navigation. Eris didn't need the recommendation. The star charts were useless here. This was a place where the rules of the universe had been shredded, a cosmic dead end where forgotten things came to fester. It was the perfect place to hide a library or a tomb. He felt the keystone memory thrumming in his mind, no longer a distinct object but a graft onto his own consciousness. It was a constant, low-level hum of a billion lives, a chorus of ghosts whispering in a language of pure thought. At first, it was disorienting, a psychic vertigo that made the ship's lurching feel insignificant. Then, the fragments began to bleed through. He was standing on a plane of black glass under a violet sky, watching crystalline towers grow from the ground, chiming with a music that was both architecture and emotion. He felt the collective pride of the Vask, the builders, a species who felt no difference between a symphony and a skyscraper. The vision lasted only a second, but the emotional residue, a profound sense of creative joy, lingered like the warmth of a distant sun. A moment later, he was deep underground, his thoughts slow, patient, and utterly alien. He was a Groll, contemplating a theorem that described the precise curvature of a lover's smile in 12 dimensions. The satisfaction of the solved equation was a pleasure more intense than any physical sensation he had ever known. Then came the fall. He felt the Vaask's collective confusion as their musical towers began to emit discordant, painful notes, their structures unraveling into silence and omniscient. He felt the Groll's intellectual terror as their perfect mathematics began to sprout paradoxes, their logic turning to gibberish, their minds fraying as the very concept of reason was edited from their reality. He was experiencing their extinctions not as a historical record, but as a present, personal trauma. The weight of it was crushing. It was one thing to read about a tragedy. It was another to have the grief of 1,000 murdered civilizations wired directly into your soul. He gripped the command chair's armrest, knuckles white, sweat beading on his forehead. This was the burden not just to carry the memory, but to feel it. Every victory, every love, every last fading cry of despair. He saw flashes of his own life intertwining with theirs. He saw Ilara, not as the Silent's cruel puppet, but as she was, building a wobbly tower of toy blocks, her face a mask of fierce concentration. He saw the pride he felt in that moment, a feeling so pure it ached. He recognized its shape in the Vaask's love for their crystal cities, and the keystone wasn't just a record, it was a mirror. It is reflecting the universal patterns of existence, the things that made any life, anywhere, worth remembering. The insight strengthened him. He was not just fighting for ghosts. He was fighting for the very idea of a father's love, of a builder's pride, of a thinker's satisfaction. He was fighting for the things that the silent, in their sterile quest for nothingness, could never understand. Dr. Thorne, Juno's voice cut through his reverie. I am detecting an anomaly, a signal, heavily degraded on a standard human emergency frequency. Eris straightened, the ghosts receding to a low hum. A human signal out here. His heart hammered against his ribs. The 4.7% survival chance had felt like a death sentence, but if someone else was here, it is an automated distress beacon. Juno clarified. Pre-lapse encoding. The ship's identifier is the remembrance. The signal's content is corrupted, but I can isolate a few repeating phrases, survive the quiet, and found a sanctuary, and memory is safe. A cold dread washed over Eris, chasing away the flicker of hope. It was too perfect. A ship named the Remembrance, speaking of surviving the quiet, broadcasting on an old frequency, found in the one place he was going. It wasn't a rescue, it was bait. The Silent had learned from their first encounter. They knew he was a mnemonic archaeologist. They knew what words would lure him in. They were dangling the one thing he couldn't resist, the promise of an ally, of a shared memory. They're evolving, Eris whispered to himself. They're not just erasing, they're creating. They're writing their own narratives now. He had to be sure. Ignoring a potential survivor felt like a betrayal of everything he was fighting for, but flying blindly into a trap would be the end of it all. Juno, do not acknowledge the signal. Bring us to a full stop behind that gravitational anomaly. Keep us in its sensor shadow. Launch a microprobe. Passive scanners only. I want to see this sanctuary for myself. The stellograph maneuvered silently, tucking itself behind a ripple in space where a dead star's gravity bent light into a shimmering curtain. A probe, no larger than Eris's hand, detached from the hull and slipped away. A tiny ghost drifting toward the beacon's source. The probe's visual feed appeared on the main screen. There it was. The Remembrance. An old Terran Confederacy cruiser, a model Eris recognized from historical files. It was dark, adrift, pockmarked with micrometeorite impacts. It looked authentic. It looked dead. The probe circled it. Scanning. No life signs, Juno reported. No power signatures. The distress beacon is running on a decaying power cell, which would explain the signal degradation. Hull integrity is compromised in several sections, consistent with long-term dereliction. Everything looked right. Too right. Take the probe inside, Eris commanded, his gut twisting into a knot. Find the bridge. The probe found a breach in the aft section and slipped through, its lights cutting through the inky blackness of the ship's interior. The corridors were filled with a thin layer of dust. Personal effects, a data pad here. A floated photo frame there were scattered about, as if the crew had vanished mid-sentence. The probe's camera panned across a bulkhead, and Eris's breath hitched. Scrawled on the metal, as if with a failing power tool, were words. We remember Ilara. The air left his lungs in a rush. It was impossible. A violation. This wasn't just a trap anymore. It was a desecration. The Silent had reached into his own private, guarded memories, the ones he kept walled off even from himself, and scrawled them on this dead ship's walls. They weren't just hunting the Keystone. They were hunting him, using his own past as ammunition. The rage returned, cold and sharp this time. It's a construct, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Juno, analyze the ship's material composition. Deeper scan. Look for informational density, quantum entanglement, anything that isn't standard titanium alloy. The probe's light fell upon the command bridge. It was empty, dust-covered, silent. And then, on the captain's chair, a single object materialized from shimmering static, a stuffed bear, brown with one button eye, an exact replica of the one Ilara had clutched in her hospital bed as the data plague consumed her. Warning! Juno's voice suddenly spiked with something that almost sounded like alarm. The derelict is not composed of matter. It is a complex, solidified information structure. It is the anti-data, a memory hole given physical form. It's activating. On the screen, the interior of the remembrance dissolved. The dust. The corridors. The scrawled words, they all collapsed into a vortex of roaring static. Outside, the hull of the derelict ship cracked open, not with an explosion, but with a silent, sickening peeling, like a rind from a rotten fruit. From within, it did not bleed fire or shrapnel, but tendrils of pure nothingness, shimmering ribbons of the same corrupting static that formed the silent. They lashed out, not at the speed of light, but at the speed of thought, aimed directly at the stellograph. Evasive maneuvers. Aris roared, but it was too late. The tendrils weren't physical. They didn't impact the hull. They passed through it. Alarm screamed as Juno's voice became frantic. They are not attacking the ship. Doctor, they are delinking its informational matrix. Ship's logs are erasing. Navigational data is corrupting. My own core programming is fraying. The ship wasn't being destroyed. It was being forgotten, piece by piece, right around him. The lights flickered and died. The hum of the life support ceased. The emergency lighting that came on was weak, casting him in a blood-red glow. On his console, the ship's name, Stellograph, flickered, the letters rearranging themselves into nonsense before vanishing. This was how it ended, not in a blaze of glory, but in a quiet, tidy deletion. But the Silent had made a mistake. They had made it personal. They had used Ilara. Eris slammed his hands on his console, closing his eyes, and did the only thing he could. He reached for the keystone. He didn't just access it. He opened the floodgates. He let the raw, untamed power of 1,000 defiant civilizations pour into his own mind. He focused not on their grief, but on their fury. He searched for a memory of resistance, of a weapon made not of matter, but of pure, unadulterated meaning. He found it in the final moments of the Vaask. As their world was being silenced, a small cadre of their kind had performed the adagio of unmaking, a sonic sequence of such complex, perfect beauty that it could not be erased, only shattered, and its shattering would annihilate any anti-informational presence nearby. It was a suicide bomb made of art. He didn't have their voice, but he had the Stellograph's comms array and the full power of its reactor. "Juno!" he screamed into the growing silence. "Divert all remaining power to the main transmitter. Route it through me. Broadcast what I'm sending you. Full spectrum. Maximum power." He felt the ship's energy surge into his interface rig, a painful torrent of raw power. He took the intricate, crystalline memory of the Vaask's final song and screamed it into the void. It wasn't sound. It was a coherent wave of pure information, a declaration of existence so potent, so absolute, that it was poison to the silent. The universe outside the viewport flashed white. A silent, concussive wave of reality washed over the memory predator. The tendrils of static dissolved, the construct of the remembrance screaming a silent, digital shriek as its fabricated existence was torn apart by a truth it could not unwrite. The feedback threw Eris across the bridge. He slammed into the far wall, his head cracking against the metal, and slumped to the floor, darkness closing in. His last conscious thought was not of victory, but of a chilling certainty. He had survived. He had shown them he could fight back, and in doing so, he had just confirmed to the entire silent chorus of his enemy that he, Eris Thorn, was the single greatest threat to their quiet, orderly, empty universe. The hunt had just begun. Darkness gave way to the insistent, rhythmic beeping of a medical monitor and the low, synthetic hum of a ship slowly stitching itself back together. Eris awoke on a diagnostic bed in the medbay, the metallic tang of a nutrient solution in his mouth and a dull, concussive ache radiating from the back of his skull. The emergency lights were gone, replaced by the ship's standard cool, white illumination. He sat up, his muscles protesting, and saw the damage. Cracks spiderwebbed across the medbay's display screen, and a panel in the ceiling hung open, spilling a nest of crystalline wiring. The ship was wounded, but alive. "Juno!" he called out, his voice hoarse. "Damage report." The AI's voice that responded was subtly different. It was flatter, with a faint, almost imperceptible lag between syllables, like an echo of a ghost. "Core programming has been restored from tertiary backups. Approximately 38% of my heuristic and personality subroutines were permanently erased. Navigational archives, historical logs, and 92% of non-essential data have been wiped. The ship's name is not in my memory." The words hit Eris harder than the wall had. The stellograph was gone, not in name only, but in essence. The memories that had made it more than a machine, the records of its journeys, the nuances of its AI's learned behaviors had been scoured away. He and the ship were now both survivors suffering from a profound amnesia, haunted by a past they could feel but not fully recall. "But we are functional?" Eris asked, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "Power, life support, propulsion. All primary systems are operational, albeit at 74% efficiency." Juno confirmed. The weaponized broadcast caused significant power conduit decay. It was an illogical but effective tactic. "Doctor, my surviving subroutines are still processing the paradox of using a communications array to transmit a destructive absolute. An absolute. That's what the Vask's final song had felt like. Not a weapon, but a statement of fact so undeniable it broke anything built on a lie. He had survived, but the cost was steep. He was now flying a ghost ship with a half-amnesiac AI through the most dangerous sector of known space, and he had just announced himself to an enemy that fed on memory itself. He made his way to the bridge, the ship's silence feeling heavier than before. The main view screen was active, showing the distorted, fluidic chaos of the umbral drift. The wreckage of the remembrance was gone. Not even dust remained. It had been unwritten so completely that only Eris, and what was left of Juno, would ever know it had been there. The keystone memory in his mind was quiet now, seemingly exhausted by the broadcast. But it felt different, more deeply integrated. He no longer felt like its carrier. He felt like a part of it, one memory intertwined with a billion others. He looked down at his hands, and for a fleeting moment, they seemed translucent, woven from the same threads of light and data as the visions he'd experienced. "The course," he said, his voice regaining its strength. "Is the navigational data from the Keystone still intact?" "Affirmative," Juno replied. "The data you uploaded was shielded by your own neural interface during the attack. It remains our only valid navigational reference. According to the fragments, We are approaching a convergence point. The data refers to it not as a place, but as a scribe's locus. A scribe, not a librarian, not a guard, a scribe. Someone who writes things down, who makes things permanent. The name resonated with a deep sense of purpose. The Chronocron wasn't just a vault. It was a workshop. It was a place where memory could be forged into something harder than history, something immune to the red pen of the silent. As if summoned by the thought, a new presence brushed against the edges of his consciousness. It wasn't the cold, nullifying touch of the silent. This was something else. It was ancient, vast, and utterly indifferent. It felt like the psychic equivalent of granite, a presence of immense age and patience. On the view screen, the swirling chaos of the drift began to part, not violently, but as if gently pushed aside by an unseen hand. A structure was revealed in the clearing. It was not built of metal or stone, but of woven light and shadow, a lattice of impossible angles that seemed to fold in on itself. At its heart was a perfect sphere of absolute blackness, a hole in the universe that did not radiate cold, but a profound, unnerving stillness. "Is that the Chronocron?" Aris whispered, a sense of awe and terror warring within him. "Data's signature is inconclusive," Juno stated, her new, flatter tone making the understatement even more chilling. "It is not emitting energy, nor is it reflecting any. It does not appear to possess mass in the conventional sense. It is, for all intents and purposes, a physical paradox. My sensors are unable to resolve its existence, yet my optical scanners confirm it is there." The ship drifted closer, drawn in by a gentle, irresistible current. As they approached, Aris saw that the woven lattice was not static. It was writing, symbols, languages he had never seen. Alphabets of pure geometry flowed across its surface, appearing and disappearing in a constant, silent symphony of information. This was a place of active creation. Then he felt the presence focus on him, on the ship. A voice entered his mind, not invasive like the silent, but calm, clear, and impossibly old. "You are loud," it said. The voice was neither masculine nor feminine, organic nor synthetic. It was the voice of information itself. "You carry the memories of the unwritten. You have made them sing again. This is not permitted." A figure detached itself from the lattice, coalescing from the flowing symbols. It was humanoid, tall and slender, its body a shimmering cascade of light and code. It had no face, only a smooth, featureless ovoid of light where a head should be. This was a scribe. "I'm not here to fight," Eris broadcasted on an open channel, hoping the being could understand such a primitive method. "I've come for sanctuary, for this memory. It needs to be protected." "Protection is a form of stasis," the scribe's mental voice replied, its tone uninflected by any emotion. "We do not protect. We record. The great edit is a natural cycle. What is weak, what is forgotten, is pruned. It is the way of things. The universe strives for simplicity, for a clean page. There's nothing natural about genocide." Eris shot back, his anger flaring. "Wiping out entire civilizations, their art, their love, their history that's not pruning. That's vandalism. Your terms are emotional, irrelevant," the scribe stated. "The silent are merely the tools of this cycle. They are the entropy of information. We are its archivists. We record the final, simplified state. Your keystone memory is a flaw in the process, a beautiful, stubborn, and ultimately doomed anomaly. It creates noise. It resists the silence." The scribe raised a hand for And from the sphere of blackness at the heart of the chronocron, a sliver of darkness detached itself. It was a perfect, razor-thin line of absolute nothing, and it began to move toward the ship. "Warning," Juno said, her voice still flat but now laced with an urgency that transcended her damaged programming. "The object approaching is a quantum filament. It does not cut matter. It severs the bonds of causality. If it touches us, we will not be destroyed. We will have never existed." Eris stared at the line of uncreation moving slowly, inexorably, toward them. He couldn't fight it. The Vosk song was a weapon against a lie, but this thing was a tool of absolute truth, the universe's final, non-negotiable edit. He was out of options. The scribe considered him a flaw. The silent considered him a threat. He was trapped between the universe's janitors and its undertakers. And then he realized the flaw in their logic. Both of them saw memory as a static thing, something to be erased or recorded. They didn't understand what it meant to be human. "You're wrong," Eris said, his voice now calm. He closed his eyes, not in surrender, but in concentration. He reached deep into the keystone, past the epic histories of the Groll and the Vosk, and pulled out the smallest but most insignificant memories. A child's laughter on a world whose son had died 1 billion years ago. The taste of a particular fruit from a tree that no longer had a name. The feeling of cool sand between the toes of a creature who had never seen an ocean. He didn't broadcast them. He didn't weaponize them. He simply held them. He remembered them. "What are you doing?" the scribe's voice asked, a flicker of something akin to curiosity in its tone. The quantum filament paused in its approach. Memory isn't just a record, Eris thought back, focusing all his will on the transmission of the idea. It's not static. It changes. It grows. It combines. He then did something insane, an act of sheer, desperate improvisation. He took a memory from the keystone, the Groll's satisfaction at solving their theorem, and he deliberately wove it into his own memory of watching Alara build her block tower. The two memories merged, and the Groll's abstract, cosmic satisfaction fused with the deeply personal, fiercely paternal love of a human father. The result was not a hybrid, it was something new. A third memory, a concept that had never existed before the equation for a father's pride. The keystone memory, which had been a library of separate volumes, suddenly ignited. The memories within it began to touch, to overlap, to merge. The Vosk's grief for their silent towers combined with the terror of a species of gas giant floaters as their atmosphere was siphoned away. The new memory was not grief or terror, but a profound, resonant concept of home and its loss. He was not just remembering, he was creating. He was forcing the static past to evolve. On the bridge of the ship, the air began to shimmer. The keystone was overflowing, its new, vibrant, evolving memories projecting themselves, turning the sterile metal room into a kaleidoscope of alien suns, impossible geometries, and emotions so profound they had no human name. The scribe recoiled, its form flickering violently. "This is chaos," its thought voice hissed, and for the first time there was a hint of something sharp in it. "Fear. You are not preserving the past. You are contaminating it with the present. You are creating paradoxes." "No," Eris projected back, his mind now a blazing forge of creation. "I'm creating the future, a future where we don't have to be forgotten." The quantum filament wavered, its perfect line of nothingness seeming to lose its resolve. He had shown the scribe something it had never conceived of. Memory was not an artifact to be catalogued. It was a seed, and he had just planted a forest. The scribe's featureless face turned toward the black sphere, as if consulting with a higher power. "The process is corrupted," it declared. "The anomaly is no longer passive. It is now a contagion. The edit must be accelerated." The filament dissolved, when the great sphere of blackness at the center of the chronicron began to pulse. A deep, slow heartbeat of absolute void. The scribe turned back to Eris, his form solidifying, the flowing code of its body hardening into something sharp, something militant. "You have forced our hand, memory breaker. We will not simply record the silence now. We will create it." The chronicron, the great library of the cosmos, was no longer a neutral observer. It had just declared war on the very concept of a living past. The scribe's declaration of war was not followed by the deployment of weapons, but by an act of profound, cosmic censorship. The chronicron itself began to change. The elegant, flowing lattice of light and shadow froze, the endless stream of creation halting in mid-synthesis. The structure became rigid, its graceful curves hardening into weaponized angles. The sphere of blackness at its heart pulsed faster, no longer a quiet archive of oblivion, but the beating heart of an active, hungry void. A wave of pure conceptual pressure washed over Eris's ship, a force that didn't push on the hull, but on the very idea of the vessel. He felt it in his mind, a crushing certainty that his ship did not, could not, and should not exist. It was the scribe's will made manifest, an attempt to edit him out of reality through sheer, overwhelming logic. But Eris was no longer just a man, right? He was a nexus, a living paradox where a billion dead memories were coming back to life, mingling and evolving. The creative, chaotic energy of the newly fused memories within him pushed back, a vibrant, illogical shield of "I am" against the scribe's cold, rational "you are not." The ship groaned, its systems flickering under the strain, but it held. It held because Eris, fused with the defiant lives of the unwritten, refused to let it go. "Juno!" he grunted, the effort of resisting the scribe's will making his teeth ache. "What is it doing?" "It is recataloguing," the AI's flat voice responded, though the data streaming across the auxiliary screens was a frantic torrent of impossible readings. "The chronicron is performing a universal coherency sweep. It is identifying and isolating all informational paradoxes. You, Doctor, and the memory you carry are being designated as the primary anomaly. It is preparing to resolve you." Resolve. The word was so clean, so sterile, for an act of total annihilation. The scribe raised its hands, and across the now militarized lattice of the chronicron, thousands of smaller spheres of blackness bloomed like nightshade flowers. They were miniature versions of the central void, each one a focused engine of erasure. The universe requires a single, authoritative narrative. The scribe's voice echoed in Eris's mind, colder and harder than before. "Your chaotic synthesis of history is a corruption. It must be purged before it can infect the source code of what is to come. We gave you a choice. You chose noise." The spheres detached from the chronicron, not flying toward him, but simply arriving. They surrounded his ship, a silent, waiting fleet of miniature black holes, each one ready to excise a piece of his existence from the timeline. He was checkmated. He couldn't fight them. He couldn't outrun them. Any move he made would be instantly erased. His mind raced, sifting through the swirling chaos of the keystone. He looked for an escape, a weapon, a defense. He found memories of desperate last stands, of noble sacrifices, of clever tactical retreats from a dozen different species across 1,000,000 years of forgotten wars. None of them would work here. This wasn't a war of energy or matter. It was a war of definition, and the scribe held the ultimate dictionary. Defeated, he let his mind drift, the weight of his failure settling upon him. His thoughts turned, as they always did in his darkest moments, to Alara. He saw her in the hospital, her small body frail, her mind being slowly, inexorably overwritten by the data plague. He remembered the doctors, their faces grim, explaining that her consciousness was being fragmented, corrupted, lost in a sea of meaningless information. He had tried to save her then, using his own experimental mnemonic tech to build a shielded data vault for her memories, a sanctuary, he had called it. But the plague was too aggressive. It didn't just corrupt, it actively rewrote, turning precious memories into malicious code. His sanctuary became a trap, accelerating the very process he sought to stop. He had failed. He had not only lost her, he had actively participated in her erasure. The memory was his personal hell, the one place the Silent hadn't needed to touch because he guarded its agony so fiercely himself. And in that moment of absolute despair, as he relived his greatest failure, he found his salvation. He had failed to save Alara because he had tried to build a wall. He had treated her memory as a static thing to be protected, just as the scribe treated the universe's memory as a static thing to be recorded. He was making the same mistake again. The spheres of nothingness began to close in, their proximity causing the very atoms of the ship's hull to vibrate with existential uncertainty. He had seconds. "Juno," he said, a strange, wild calm settling over him. "I'm going to do something illogical." "That appears to be your primary methodology, Doctor," the AI replied. "Open a direct, unshielded channel to the scribe, all frequencies, and patch it directly into my neural interface. I'm not going to broadcast a memory. I'm going to broadcast a question." He ignored the scribe's overwhelming presence, the crushing weight of its certainty, and focused on one simple human thought. He thought of Alara, of his failure, of the paradox of his love and his loss. Then he pushed the question out into the void. If the universe strives for simplicity, why does it create things that love? The scribe did not answer. The spheres paused, inches from the hull. The question, so simple and so profoundly illogical, hung in the space between them. It was a paradox the scribe could not resolve. Love was inefficient. It created attachments, irrational behaviors, grief. It was the ultimate source of complexity and noise, a direct contradiction to the goal of a clean, simple universe. Yet, it existed. Love is a biological imperative for replication, an artifact of primitive evolution. The scribe finally answered, its voice laced with a new, subtle uncertainty. It was the answer of a librarian who had read the definition of a word but had never felt its meaning. "No," Eris projected back, pushing another piece of himself into the channel. "It's not. It's a choice, a memory that refuses to be forgotten." And then he did the most terrifying thing he had ever done. He let go of the keystone. He didn't push it away, but simply released his hold. He severed the link between his mind and the billion lives he carried. For a heart-stopping second, he was just Eris Thorn again, small, mortal, and crushingly alone. The keystone, untethered, flared with incandescent light. It was no longer shielded by his consciousness, no longer directed by his will. It was a raw, unfiltered supernova of memory, history, and emotion. The Vask's pride, the Groll's satisfaction, the love, The grief, the anger, the joy of 1,000 extinct civilizations erupted into the void, not as a coherent song, but as a chaotic, beautiful, screaming wave of pure existence. It washed over everything. It washed over the scribe. The being of pure logic was struck by a tidal wave of illogical feeling. It felt the Vasks' love for their crystal cities as they crumbled. It felt the Grolls' despair as their perfect theorems dissolved into nonsense. For the first time, the scribe was not recording history. It was experiencing it. Its perfect, shimmering form began to flicker, its code destabilizing as it was flooded with the messy, contradictory but beautiful data of life itself. The spheres of nothingness dissolved, their directive forgotten. But the wave didn't stop with the scribe. It hit the chronocron itself. The rigid, weaponized structure shuddered. The black heart of the archive, the engine of the great edit, began to pulse erratically. The wave of memory, of life, was a virus in the sterile operating system of the universe's end. A single crack of pure, white light appeared on the surface of the central sphere. Then another, and another. The chronocron was breaking. And from within the cracks, something stirred. It wasn't the cold presence of the silent. It wasn't the indifferent logic of the scribes. It was something older, stranger. It was the reason the chronocron had been built in the first place, the thing it had been designed to contain. It wakes. The scribe's thought voice whispered, its certainty shattered, its mind now a maelstrom of alien grief and second-hand joy. What have you done? You have broken the vessel. You have woken the first noise. The great sphere of blackness shattered, not into an explosion of energy, but into an implosion of silence. And from the hole where it had been, a presence emerged, a being not of anti-data like the silent, nor of pure information like the scribes, but of something else entirely pure, unadulterated possibility. It was a being of chaos, of creation, of endless, unfiltered potential. It looked at the rigid chronocron, at the reeling scribe, at Eris's small, battered ship, and it laughed. The sound was a symphony of every song ever sung and every scream ever cried. Eris Thorn, in his desperate attempt to save memory from the forces of order and oblivion, had just unleashed the ultimate agent of chaos upon a universe that craved only silence. He had not won a war. He had just become the first casualty in a new one. A war between a universe that wanted to forget, a universe that wanted to control, and a universe that just wanted to be. The being that emerged from the shattered heart of the chronocron had no form, yet it filled the void. It was a swirling, effervescent storm of pure potential, a cosmic infant released from a 10-billion-year-old crib, where the silent were a void of information and the scribes were a rigid crystal of it. This first noise was a roiling ocean. In its presence, the rigid laws of physics that had governed the umbral drift became mere suggestions. Colors that had no name bled into existence, and the silence of space was filled with the ghostly echoes of every sound that had ever been or could ever be. It was the universe's raw, untamed imagination made manifest, and it was utterly, horrifyingly beautiful. The scribe, its logical mind fractured by the keystone's emotional deluge, simply drifted, its form flickering like a dying hologram. It was an entity built to catalog a finished book, utterly unprepared for the author to show up and start gleefully tearing out the pages. The first noise turned its attention a feeling like being bathed in the light of a newborn star toward Eris. A new song it communicated, not in words, but in a direct transfer of pure, joyous concepts. You sing the song of broken things made whole again. You sing of then and now together, Eris, drained and hollowed out from releasing the keystone, felt the entity's curiosity wash over him. It wasn't a threat. It was a child seeing something new for the first time, and he was the shiny, fascinating toy. He felt it gently probe his mind, not invasively, but with an innocent wonder. It touched upon his memory of Ilara, not the pain of her loss, but the warmth of her hand in his, the sound of her laughter. This the first noise exclaimed, the concept so bright it made Eris flinch. This is a good sound, sad and happy, all at once a paradox. I love paradoxes, the untethered keystone memory, which had been drifting like a cloud of brilliant dust, was drawn to the first noise. The entity enveloped it, not consuming it, but embracing it. The billion lives of the unwritten were not erased or archived, but welcomed. The Va'ask's song of creation harmonized with the Groll's poetry of logic, and 1,000 other forgotten legacies danced together in the entity's chaotic embrace. It was not preservation. It was a resurrection, a celebration. This celebration had consequences. The breaking of the Chronicron, the release of this primal chaos, had sent a shock wave through the very fabric of reality. The umbral drift was dissolving, its distorted space-time snapping back into a semblance of order. Through the clearing fog, Eris saw them, dozens of them, then hundreds, shimmering holes in the fabric of space, the humanoid shapes of static and corrupted data. The silent. They weren't attacking. They were converging. They were being drawn here, to the first noise, their ultimate opposite. They were the universe's immune system, and they had just detected the ultimate infection. At the same time, from the other direction, came the scribes. Not just the one he had faced, but a fleet of them, their form solidifying from the informational substrate of the cosmos, their lattice ships of light and shadow cold, hard, and utterly unified in their purpose. They came to reimpose order, to cage the chaos he had unleashed. He was caught in the middle, a tiny, insignificant moat between the two fundamental, opposing forces of the universe, the drive toward silent, simple nothingness, and the drive toward ordered, static everything. And he had just introduced a third, impossible variable, the chaotic, vibrant, unpredictable force of life and memory. The scribe he had first encountered drifted toward him, its form slowly stabilizing, its mind now a strange hybrid of cold logic and the alien emotions it had been forced to experience. Look what your noise has wrought. Memory breaker, it projected, its thought voice now carrying a new, unfamiliar tone of weary resignation. You have not saved the past. You have doomed the future to an endless, unwinnable war between the edit and the chaos. There will be no peace, no quiet, no final page. Maybe a story isn't supposed to have a final page, Eris said, his voice quiet but firm. He looked at the swirling, joyous form of the first noise, now surrounded by the silent, advancing fleet of its negations. He looked at the cold, implacable armada of the scribes, preparing to sterilize reality in the name of order. He saw two different kinds of death, one of quiet fading and one of rigid perfection. And he chose a third option. He chose life. Juno, he said, his hands flying over the console, the ship's systems responding sluggishly. I need power. Everything you have left, not for the transmitter. For the engines, I need to get close. Close to the anomaly. Doctor, Juno's flat voice questioned. Proximity to that entity is computationally inadvisable. Its chaotic output is rewriting fundamental physical constants on a quantum level. I know, Eris said. A desperate, impossible plan forming in his mind. I'm counting on it. He piloted the battered ship not toward the edges, not toward escape, but directly into the heart of the storm. He flew toward the first noise. The silent converged, their tendrils of anti-data lashing out, trying to erase him. But the chaotic aura of the first noise acted as a shield, its very nature a paradox that their simple logic of erasure could not process. The scribes fired their beams of causal severance, but the beams wavered and dissolved as the very concept of cause and effect became fluid and unreliable in the entity's presence. He broke through the lines, his ship groaning, panels buckling, the laws of physics that held it together fraying at the seams. He brought the vessel to a stop at the very edge of the first noise's swirling, formless form, so close he could see the birth and death of entire concepts within its depths. He closed his eyes and reached out with his mind, not with a memory, not with a question, but with an invitation. He projected the one thing that was now purely his own, the memory he had forged the perfect paradoxical equation of a father's pride. He offered it freely, a gift. The first noise paused in its joyous dance. It focused on him, on the memory he offered. It was a memory of love and creation, but it was also a memory of structure, of a beautiful, perfect logic inherited from the Groll. It was a memory that was both chaos and order. You sing a song of both, the entity asked, its wonder palpable. We all do, Eris projected back, pouring all of his conviction, all of his humanity, into the thought. That's what it means to be alive, to live between the silence and the noise, to build things that will one day fall, to love things we will one day lose. The story isn't in the beginning or the end. It's in the middle. It's in the paradox. The first noise considered this. It looked at the silent, its entropy. It looked at the scribes, its structure, and it looked at Eris, its meaning. Then, it did something that neither the scribes nor the silent could have ever predicted. It chose. It didn't fight. It didn't flee. It began to weave. It took the raw, chaotic energy of its own being and began to thread it into the fabric of reality. It took the keystone memory, the billion lives of the unwritten, and instead of just celebrating them, it began to anchor them. Across the galaxy, things began to reappear. A pulsar, long vanished, winked back into existence. A constellation erased from star charts bloomed again in the night sky. On 1,000 worlds, people suddenly remembered a colleague, a friend, a loved one they had never known they had forgotten. The lapse wasn't just being halted, it was being reversed. The first noise wasn't defeating the silent, it was healing the damage they had done, filling the empty pages not with the old text, but with a new one, a story infused with the wild, chaotic beauty of memory itself. The scribes halted their advance, their perfect logic unable to process this act of large-scale, retroactive creation. The silent recoiled, their very nature anathema to this sudden, vibrant resurgence of what was. Eris watched, tears streaming down his face, as the universe began to remember itself. His work was done, but the first noise had one last gift. It reached out and touched his ship, and in his mind, he felt a final, gentle thought from the entity. Every song needs a singer. The ship's battered hull shimmered, its wounds healing, its systems flaring back to 100% efficiency. On the console, where the ship's name had been wiped, new letters appeared, burning in soft, white light. It did not say Stellograph. It said the Midverse. His mission was no longer to run, to hide, to preserve. His new mission was to wander, to explore, to be a witness. He was no longer a mnemonic archaeologist. He was a storyteller. He turned his ship away from the silent, staring armies of order and oblivion, and out toward the newly rewritten stars. The war wasn't over. The silent would still hunger. The scribes would still seek to impose their sterile order, but they were no longer the only forces at play. The universe now had a third axis, a voice for the beautiful, chaotic, illogical, and defiantly memorable story of life. Eris Thorn set his course for the farthest star he could see, his mind quiet for the first time in years. The ghosts of the unwritten were at peace, their stories now woven back into the tapestry of what is. And somewhere, in the quiet hum of his ship's engine, he could almost hear his daughter's laughter, no longer a ghost of the past, but a promise for the future. He was finally bringing the message home. We were here, and now we are again.